The story is built on verified and authoritative sources, including Kim Philby's own memoir, My Silent War, Ben Macintyre's investigative work, A Spy Among Friends, Andrew Lownie's research, The Cambridge Five, declassified documents from the British Domestic Intelligence Agency, MI5, and in-depth articles from reputable newspapers such as The Times, The Guardian, the Daily Telegraph, and BBC News. Hello. Today we will talk about a story that is both romantic and heartbreaking, like the saddest love songs of Beirut in 1956. It is the love between Eleanor Philby and Kim Philby, a strong, passionate woman and a notorious double agent. The story includes psychological analysis and complex emotions based on authoritative sources. Eleanor's memoir, Kim Philby, The Spy I Loved, 1968. Materials from The Guardian and credible academic studies. This is not a novel, but a real fragment of history where love intertwines with secrets and betrayal. Let's begin in Beirut, a sun-drenched and mysterious city in the mid-20th century. It was a place where journalists, diplomats, and spies gathered, sipping cocktails at dinner parties, where every glance concealed a hidden story. Eleanor Carolyn Kearns, then the wife of Sam Pope Brewer, a veteran correspondent for the New York Times, stepped into this scene like a heroine from a novel. Eleanor was not the kind of woman who faded into the background behind her husband. She had worked in advertising before World War II, then became an information specialist for the U.S. government, writing civil defense reports that The Guardian described as the best any agency ever produced. She had even been trained in Istanbul, learning how to kill in 30 seconds as part of Allied propaganda work. Intelligent, strong, and a bit adventurous, that was Eleanor before she met Kim Philby. Then Philby appeared, like a strange wind blowing into her life. Kim Philby, a correspondent for The Observer, with deep blue eyes, a courteous smile, and a loneliness that seemed to radiate from his every gesture. But he was no ordinary journalist. He was a British spy working for the Soviets since the 1930s, a secret Eleanor knew nothing about. They began their affair in 1956, when Eleanor's marriage to Brewer was already faltering. In her memoir, Eleanor wrote that she was drawn to Philby's mystery, as if he carried an inner world she longed to explore. He gave her scraps of love notes written on cigarette wrappers, short but burning words, "You are my light in the darkness." Romantic, isn't it? Like a black and white film, but for Eleanor, it was real. That love was so powerful that Eleanor risked everything. She divorced Brewer and in 1959 married Philby in London before returning with him to Beirut. At first, married life felt like a dream. They lived in an apartment on Rue Macintyre, hosted dinner parties with friends, and Eleanor felt she had found her soulmate. She recalled moments of happiness in her book, waking up together in the mornings, taking trips to ancient villages, and the way Philby held her as if she were her entire world. But behind it all was another life. MI6 was beginning to suspect Philby of being a double agent. He often went on business trips, in fact, to pass information to the KGB, and he started drinking heavily. Eleanor remembered one night in 1962 when she returned from Jordan and found him drunk on the balcony weeping over the death of their pet fox. He sat there, in unbearable pain, unable to speak, she wrote. It was the first time she saw him fragile, like a man torn between two worlds. Eleanor loved Philby with all her heart, but her love was partly blind. She was not naive. She had worked in intelligence and knew the razor's edge of danger, but she chose to believe in the romantic version of Philby. And Philby, he was a man of many faces. He was also seen as a master manipulator, not only with his enemies, but with those closest to him. Writings on Goodreads describe him through letters as charismatic, making even Britain's elite believe he was one of them. Yet deep down he was bound by ideals and secret missions, things he placed above everything else. In 1963, Philby was confronted by MI6 in Beirut and confessed to being a Soviet agent. Instead of being arrested, he mysteriously disappeared and defected to Moscow. Eleanor was left behind, stunned and heartbroken. She was interrogated by the CIA and MI6, feeling as though she herself was a suspect. In her memoir, she described sleepless nights, wondering whether her love had been a cruel illusion. But then, through an intermediary, Philby sent a message: "Come to me in Moscow." And Eleanor, with her fierce love, did what few would dare. She sold her belongings, abandoned her life in Beirut, and flew to the Soviet Union in 1964. She hoped Moscow would be the place where they could rebuild their love. But Moscow was not Beirut. Eleanor described the city as a gray prison, cold concrete buildings, endless snow, and isolation because she didn't speak Russian. She tried to adapt, but Philby, though initially happy, was still Philby. He was busy with KGB meetings, and then the worst happened. He began an affair with Melinda McLean, the wife of fellow defector Donald McLean. The Guardian suggested the KGB may even have encouraged the affair to remove Eleanor, as an American wife posed risks to Philby's work. Whatever the reason, the betrayal was devastating. Eleanor wrote that she might have forgiven him elsewhere, but in Moscow, in the same city, seeing Melinda at gatherings, it was unbearable. It was not only infidelity, but the collapse of trust. She had sacrificed everything to be with him, yet he chose another.
Eleanor was the embodiment of those who love with their whole being, willing to risk everything for love. In psychology, her behavior resembles a variation of Stockholm Syndrome. She loved the man who imprisoned her with secrets, and when the truth emerged, the pain was multiplied. Philby, on the other hand, was a man with an emotional void. He was not malicious. He did love Eleanor in his own way, but he also belonged to another life, one bound by missions and ideology. In 1965, Eleanor decided to leave Moscow and return to the United States. She described that flight, looking down at the frozen city for the last time, tears streaming down her face, but also a sense of release. She wrote Kim Philby, The Spy I Loved, in 1968 as a way to close the past. Tragically, she died of cancer in 1969, just a year later, at the age of 54. In a world full of secrets, from the Cold War to today's social media, love remains something both powerful and fragile. Eleanor reminds us that to love is to take risks, but also to know when to let go. If you are listening to this podcast on a quiet evening, think of her, the woman who flew from Beirut to Moscow for love and finally flew home to find herself again. Thank you for joining me on this long journey. If you'd like to hear more stories, stay tuned for the next episodes.